And Lauren Sisler on the sideline. You know, we refer to Lauren as the Sideline Shimmy. This is why.
Yeah, because she shimmies all the time.
Before every game.
Yeah.
This is her routine.
She's known for her Sideline Shimmy. Sports broadcaster Lauren Sisler works as an ESPN sideline reporter for both college football and gymnastics.
She gonna get her shimmy on.
That's right.
She's gonna get her shimmy on.
But behind the camera, Lauren hid a family secret for a decade. Both of her parents struggled with opioid use disorder after being prescribed painkillers by doctors, a disease that ultimately claimed her mother's life, and then, just 5 hours later, her father's.
We're driving to the house, we're going to see Dad. And that's all I could think about. And as we start driving out to the exit of the airport, I finally just worked up the courage and I said, Uncle Mike, I just want to see my dad. Where's my dad? And he had to pull the car over and tell me that my dad had passed away too.
Do you or someone you know suffer from substance use disorder? Help is available. Please don't wait. You can check out a list of helpful resources on our website, emily'shope.charity. We've posted a link in the show notes of this podcast. Now, let's dive into this powerful episode of Grieving Out Loud. I'm your host, Angela Kennecke, and today's story is one that you won't want to miss. It's a deeply personal journey that sheds light on the struggles and resilience behind the headlines. Lauren, welcome to Grieving Out Loud. It is just a pleasure to be able to speak with you. I always say I am so sorry to meet people who have experienced something similar to what I've experienced, but I'm always so grateful to know you.
Oh, well, thank you, Angela. It's so great to be on, and just thank you for the great work that you're doing. Like you said, when we meet together under these circumstances, it can be both difficult, but also it is so wonderful to see people joining hands to really make a difference and to, do it in honor of the ones that we love.
It is going to take all of us to put an end to this drug crisis that we have found ourselves in for the last couple of decades, really, but obviously it's escalated to untenable levels, I believe. And I think it's going to take everyone and everyone sharing their story. So thank you for sharing yours in advance, and thank you for sharing it with our listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So great to be here.
Let's just dig right in. Tell me a little bit about your background, where you grew up. And I know that sports is your world. I'm a little bit sports illiterate, I have to admit, but I'm happy for you. And I think we need a lot of women in that area too. So good for you getting into that field. But tell me a little bit about what led you there and where you grew up and what your life was like.
Well, I appreciate that. Admitting that maybe sports is not your thing. There are times where it's not my thing either. I laugh about this, during college football season, which being on ESPN, traveling usually Thursday through Sunday, I get home on Sundays and, it used to be like, turn on the TV, let's watch some NFL football. And I have to admit now, sometimes I have to tell myself like, all right, got to unplug for a minute. I've got a newborn at home. He's not a newborn anymore. He's almost a year old, which is kind of wild. But, realizing, okay, time to unplug every once in a while. But, I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. It was my mom, my dad, and my older brother, Alan.
A family of 4 living in suburbia. Sounds pretty picture perfect.
We rode our bikes around the neighborhood, played hide and seek, went to the local swim club at the top of the hill, would hear Dad call for us, come on, it's time for dinner, We'd come hustling in the house, me and my brother, we'd sit around the kitchen table, eat a lovely home-cooked meal from my mom. She was an excellent cook.
On top of that, Lauren found something she was both truly passionate about and talented in: gymnastics.
I was actually a gymnast the majority of my early childhood and into my teenage years, and actually had the big, bold dream of becoming a collegiate gymnast. And so that is what I had my sights set on, started sending out my recruiting tape all over the country and ended up landing at Rutgers University. And I'm just so grateful for that opportunity. Rutgers, like New Jersey, this Virginia Southern girl, culture shock, but it was such a cool place to go and kind of pursue my career as a gymnast. And I just had that sports background, right? Growing up, we watched sports. My dad was a volunteer coach. I was in the gym all the time. My brother, competed in 3 different sports. And, that was just our livelihood.
My daughter, Emily, was a gymnast as well, so I can really appreciate your gymnastics career. She did it from the age of 5 up until she was a junior in high school. So a long time. And she was tall as well, tall for a gymnast, not
Yes.
particularly tall,
Okay.
but 5'7", 5'8", 5'7" to 5'8",
5'7" is very tall for a gymnast. I mean, we're talking like 5 foot.
for a gymnast. And you're tall.
Yeah, I'm 5'9", was 5'7" when I went into college, grew 2 more inches. So absolutely 5'7", woo, you are far up in the treetops at that point when it comes to gymnastics. So I can understand that. Now, what was Emily's best events? What did she enjoy doing the most?
Well, she won the most. She went to state and won for balance beam, which always amazed me. I mean, that is
Yeah.
tough stuff. And I always say, though, that, gymnasts are risk takers. That's a personality trait for someone who would try drugs, right? Or try something new. Definitely risk taker. But, she was a really good gymnast. And I'm so grateful for those years that we had where she did that. And I kind of thought sports would inoculate her from substance use disorder, from going down that path. But I mean, I don't think there are any guarantees in life for anyone that they won't fall into the trap of addiction.
Well, and I think you bring up such a good point because you're right. Gymnastics is a huge risk-taking sport, right? Because it's very much physical, but also very mental as well. And, I will say it takes a lot of courage to go out there and compete and put your body through that rigors of the sport. And not to mention, you mentioned balance beam being one of her best events. Talk about risk taking, tumbling down a very narrow balance beam blindly and just holding your breath, hoping you don't get hurt, don't fall off, don't split the beam. That's a big risk. But you say that nobody obviously is exempt from turning down this path. And I think that is the great work that you're doing and that we're all trying to join in hands together, is to bring light to this and help people to realize that one day you can wake up and life can just be peachy and everything's great and I'm following the rule book of life. And then next day you wake up and suddenly it takes a turn.
Lauren knows all too well about the twists and turns of life. As she excelled in gymnastics and felt supported by her Christian-loving parents, she also started to notice that her dad struggled with substance use disorder. First, his addiction involved alcohol.
That was something we were aware of as kids. But let's be real, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, like, what is alcoholism to you? I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it was. And so I was really good at compartmentalizing it. And, dad would have a little slip up, go on a weekend bender. He would be fine for 6 months. Mom would get back to your AA meetings. And that would be it. So it was something I boxed up, put on a shelf, and didn't think about. So it really didn't resonate with me that there was a major issue there because he managed it.
But it was a different story when Lauren was 16. Both of her parents went to a pain management doctor who prescribed them OxyContin. This was in the late 1990s, shortly after Purdue Pharma introduced the drug.
My parents were experiencing chronic pain. My mom had degenerative disc disease. My dad had chronic back pain. He was also in the military for 5 years and had experienced some PTSD, was dealing with some depression and things related to his military experiences. And what started out as OxyContin eventually escalated to fentanyl. So my mom actually, because she couldn't manage the OxyContin, well, we're going to try fentanyl.
So your mom was prescribed fentanyl. We should point that out.
Prescribed fentanyl, and it was a pain patch that every 72 hours she was prescribed to change it out. So I remember seeing her wear it like on her chest area, and eventually the 72 hours wasn't enough. So then it became every 48 hours, we're going to swap this thing out. Remember seeing my parents sucking on the fentanyl suckers, which are basically for breakthrough pain, and talk about becoming a norm around our house. Like, we'd go places and these sticks are hanging out of their mouths as they're driving places or sitting on the couch watching TV.
And you were in high school, on your way to college when all this was happening, right? And you don't think to question it. This is just what's the doctors prescribe it. This is what's happening. This is what your parents are doing. Did you ever think that they acted abnormally on these highly addictive and potent, powerful medications?
Well, I think the one thing that stands out to me is first and foremost is just how tired my parents were, especially my father, because my mom was on disability. And I remember my dad commuted over an hour each way to work. He worked for the Salem VA Medical Center.
Oh, so he's working in healthcare.
Yeah, working in healthcare, actually working on operating room equipment. That was like his sole job at the VA in the latter part of his career. that's where he was seeing his counselors. That's where he was really getting a lot of the help that he needed to combat the alcoholism that he was dealing with. And also the doctors he was seeing for the pain, right? He had a permanent TENS unit in his back. So he's kind of, like you said, in the walls and the confines of a medical facility, and all this is happening, right? And so he would come home on the weekends. We'd be on the couch watching TV, and I'm talking within 2 minutes, remotes in the air, and he's just, snoring away. And I just, as a 15, 16-year-old, thought, well, dad's tired. He's commuting to work each day. He's getting up at 5 a.m. He's coming home and getting home at 7 p.m. Like, of course the guy's tired.
Yeah, you're not thinking he's nodding off because of the opioids. I mean, that's not something probably that ever crossed your mind.
Not even once. And then I will say this, Angela, the one area that now looking back was a little bit alarming to me is there was an incident where my mom was like the even keel person, right? The glue of the family when it came to finances, the budget. I mean, she just kept it all together. And it's wild because there was an incident before I graduated high school where my mom had gotten, I'm talking furious at my dad, so furious that she started like throwing stuff at him. And I'm talking, this is not my mom. Like, who is this person? Throwing stuff at him. And I'm seeing my dad just well up with tears. He's crying. And my heart just hurt so bad because I'm like, what is happening? And this was happening in the house while I'm there, not behind closed doors. And come to find out, my dad had taken one of my mom's prescription drugs. And what ultimately happened is that prescription drug ran out. So my mom at that point, now looking back, was going through withdrawals and needed that medication. And she was absolutely furious because now she's left with these withdrawals because my dad ultimately took one of her prescription drugs and essentially got his fix. And now she's sitting here like, what do I do?
Right. And the withdrawals can be so much worse than the pain or anything else.
Yeah.
Can be 100 times worse. I'm just imagining all this developing, and I'm thinking about everything we know now. I'm thinking about the books I've read, the movies I've seen, the miniseries, Painkiller or Dope Sick. We all understand now that doctors were overprescribing OxyContin. The OxyContin is basically heroin in a pill. We're understanding all these people got addicted, like your parents, and so many people died because of it. But yet at the time, everybody was in denial, right? The drug companies wanted to make money. The doctors wanted to think what they were doing was okay. So really nobody was talking about it at the time when this happened to your parents.
Yeah, and I think that's the crazy part because you mentioned Dope Sick specifically. That book actually was the stories that were all within the Southwest region of Virginia, where I'm from.
Mm-hmm. And Virginia was hit so hard.
Yeah, yeah. And my parents were essentially the prequel to that book and what Beth Macy outlines in that book.
Despite her parents' struggles with substance use disorder, Lauren continued to excel in gymnastics. Her dedication and talent earned her a scholarship to compete at Rutgers University.
Went to school, communicated with my parents every day. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. There was an incident where my mom actually called and said, "You're not going back to Rutgers." I didn't understand that. She was furious. She was angry. What did I do? I don't understand. Come to find out, she had run out of her medication. She was going through withdrawals. And my dad patched it up as he always did and said, "No, your mom, she's just going through a tough time right now. Everything's going to be okay." And then she called and apologized, sent me a card.
Shortly after that, Lauren's parents visited her at Rutgers and watched her perform. She felt like her life was reaching a high point.
I hadn't broken into the lineup at Rutgers yet, but I did an exhibition routine and they got to see me compete on bars and floor. Those were my two specialties. And they were the proudest parents and everything seemed normal. I remember them staying at a hotel and we visited a lot and it was just a great experience. And I mean, I could still literally close my eyes and see them in the stands at Rutgers as they're cheering for me after I'd finished my floor routine and saluted the judges. And I could just hear my dad. He had this whistle that was just piercing. I mean, they were just so proud. And I'm like, man, I'm living my dream. And it's not just my dream. Angela, I mean, your daughter obviously competed in the sport and the dreams that are hers become yours. And there's that investment piece, right? You're investing in her and her career and her future. And I started to recognize that as I matured, realizing that, this isn't just for me. This is for our family. This is for everyone, all the blood, sweat, and tears and the financial strain that this sport has put on my family.
After her parents left, they continued to be her support system with regular phone calls and letters. Lauren still didn't sense anything was unusual with her mom and dad.
She sends me a card in the mail, the sweetest card, talking about how much she loves me and to continue chasing that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and, words of affirmation and support.
How wonderful that you have that memory to hold close in your heart, considering what happened next. What happened next could be a scene straight out of some kind of tragic movie. Lauren was wrapping up her spring break, but was still on campus because it was gymnastics season.
I'd called my parents like I always did, was studying for midterm exams, picked up the phone, called them, had a great conversation with both of them. My dad had just celebrated his 52nd birthday. And I just remember him telling me how proud he was of me and how much he missed me and couldn't wait for us to be together again when the summer rolled around, and said our goodbyes, said our I love yous, and hung up the phone. And the phone call that came next was several hours later as I'm asleep. I wake up to the phone ringing and my dad informs me that my mom had passed away.
I can't imagine the shock that an 18-year-old, you were 18?
18, yeah.
Goes through with no warning that this could happen and no idea that there was even a problem. And you get a call that your mother's dead. I mean, that's got to be like, I would think you would just have lost your mind. That's all I can think of.
A shock to the system. Because, you think about it. Like, I literally just talked to them a few hours before, and literally everything seemed in place. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed normal. Everyone seemed, par for the course. It's Sunday. We're getting ready for work tomorrow, all the things. I had actually later found out that both my parents had the flu that morning and had called into church. We went to a very small church. And so if you don't show up to church, somebody's calling you. So I remember they had checked in with our neighbor to let them know they wouldn't make it. And my brother recalls that after having talked to my parents, because he talked to them just a couple hours after I did.
But you get this call, your mother is dead. You're told to come home. This is your dad telling you, right? To come home. You get yourself there, which just amazes me, I guess. How did you remember anything? I can't imagine because I remember the shock of hearing my daughter had OD'd and trying to get to her place. And I remember I drove in the wrong direction and somehow I got turned around to go to her apartment. And to this day, I don't remember how I did that.
How you got there?
No memory.
Well, and I think that's where our bodies, obviously, the defense mechanism and how our bodies process grief and shock like that, right? But yeah, get on a plane, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And as you mentioned, I'm just talking frantic. What do? I don't have any money. I had $50 to my name. That's not getting me a flight home. This was back before you could just log onto the Delta app and be like, hey, let me book a flight, right? I remember I had to call the Continental Airlines. I didn't even know what the closest airport was because previously I had not flown to or from New Jersey. I'd only taken a train at this point early in my career. Didn't have a car on campus, didn't have the resources to get from point A to point B. There's no Uber. There's no, none of that, right? He just said, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And I think that is, I hung up the phone. I booked my flight. I get my roommate to help with an emergency credit card. All these things, are happening. And to piece it all together, how I got from point A to point B is still beyond me. But as I'm piecing it together, my plane lands. And instead of my dad being there to pick me up, it was my cousin and my uncle Mike and my cousin Justin. And in those thoughts and moments, as I'm running outside, looking everywhere for my dad, and they pull up instead, I'm thinking, well, I haven't talked to my dad in a few hours. I'm going to see him soon. He's probably taking care of things with my mom. He's probably at the hospital. We're getting in the car. We're driving to the house. We're going to see dad. And that's all I could think about. And as we start driving out to the exit of the airport, I finally just worked up the courage. And I said, Uncle Mike, I just want to see my dad. Where's my dad? And he had to pull the car over and tell me that my dad had passed away too.
Oh my gosh. That is just way too much for any one person to take, it seems like, in such a short period of time.
Yeah. And I think too, not having the explanation, right? Because it's not as simple as, oh, well, it was an accident. It was a car accident. It was this or that. Like just to like process like what in the world just happened, and not having any comprehension or understanding of it was just like, oh,
My heart just breaks for you, for your brother, for your whole family. I mean, that's awful. Just awful.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, but you've experienced that loss in such a profound way.
I know the pain.
The
I don't
pain,
know your specific pain, but I know the pain, right?
the pain, right?
And there's nothing that can compare to it. And I just think how young you were, and then just to not have the answers and to not have any understanding of what went on and to lose them both so quickly within, what was it, 12 hours of each other? Or
5 hours, actually.
oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have some extended family there to help you, and I assume your brother shows up. And when did you start to get answers about what had happened?
Well, the answers came a lot quicker than I was willing to acknowledge. It took about 90 days to get the toxicology reports. And I was home in the early summer, and we went over to the coroner's office to get those reports. And my auntie Linda, my mom's sister, basically got in the car after having walked into the coroner's office. I said, I don't want to go in. She comes out, manila envelope. She had kind of peeked through them, said, do you want to read them? And I looked at her. I said, no. And I threw it in the floorboard. 10 years went by before I ever opened those toxicology reports.
Despite both of her parents dying from fentanyl prescribed to them by doctors, that's not what Lauren told people at her college or in her hometown.
Small town community, everybody's business is everybody's business. And that was definitely the case there in Newport, Virginia. And even when I went back to Rutgers after my parents passed away, people wanted to know. And so I was just fabricating this story. My mom was dealing with a lot of pain. She was taking a lot of medication to help her with her pain. And she died of respiratory failure. And I basically kept putting that out there, respiratory failure. Okay, well, what about your dad? And I would just, well, he just died of heartbreak. My dad, died of a heart attack, the stress of losing my mom, and he was just heartbroken. And I fabricated that in my mind because I said, well, Dad's heart did technically stop, but it wasn't because of a heart attack. It was because he also ingested a lethal amount of fentanyl and overdosed.
So both your parents died from fentanyl.
Yep.
But you didn't look at that toxicology report for 10 years. So did you even know that, or did your aunt tell you that?
She tried to tell me in a loving way over time. She wasn't trying to force it, and she would do it in a way where maybe she'd be talking to someone in a sidebar conversation, or somebody would ask and it would get brought up, and I would just go fisticuffs with her. I'm telling you, like throwing an absolute fit. You would have thought I turned back into a 2-year-old, throwing tantrums. Duh. That's not true. You're lying. Like I would just call her a liar and did everything I could to mask what had actually happened. And because I wanted to stick with my story, I never could acknowledge the truth behind all of it. And I literally told this story over and over and over again that like I believed it. So as I'm envisioning what happened that night, that my mom was taking the medication as she should have been. She was in a lot of pain, and ultimately she went into respiratory failure. I could not acknowledge the fact that my mom literally put a patch in the freezer, cut it open, sucked on it, and that is what ended her life.
Well, I think of so many things when I think about this time in your life. One thing that astounds me is that you went back to school. I think a lot of people, if they had lost both of their parents, would just be floundering around. I mean, you could have started using substances yourself. There's a lot of paths you could have chosen, not all healthy ones. What do you think it is about you that you were able to pick yourself up and go on?
That's a question, that I've been pondering for a very long time. And I will say this, I do think you talked about gymnastics and some of the things that gymnastics teaches us. And I think as an athlete, as a competitor, as a risk taker, I was really good at compartmentalizing things. I really developed this like crazy window of tolerance. And so I think there's that piece of it where I was already kind of paving the way through gymnastics when I get knocked down, you keep getting up, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And it's like that competitor mindset. It was like I was competing constantly, just competing against myself, competing against my fears, my grief, my shame, all the things. And honestly, I will say this, when it comes to substance, I was 15 years old. I remember being in high school. 15, is when I really started to see the drugs and the alcohol kind of coming to fruition. And I remember making a decision like, I don't need any of this. Gymnastics is too important. My life is too important. I don't need all those distractions. I didn't remove myself from those situations. I was going to parties, I was around it, but I just chose not to participate. And I did that at 15 before I really, truly ever recognized that my dad was an alcoholic and that could affect me. I didn't learn that till later in life, but it was a decision that I made that I still stand on, that was one of the best decisions of my life, because who knows what pathway that could have taken me down. But you mentioned going back to Rutgers, 2 weeks after my parents died, went back to Rutgers. My aunt and uncle sat me down. My aunt said, look, Lauren, you've got a commitment to yourself, your university, your teammates, and this is what your parents would want. So I went back to school. And I didn't really think I had an option, and I think that kind of kept me grounded in many ways, because I had that support system. I had my teammates, but I was going out and still going to parties, frat parties, and living college life. And I remember walking into like a frat house and seeing lines of Coke on a table and just like freaking out and being like, it just never struck me as something that I felt compelled to do. And I think a lot of that is, I take pride in controlling myself and having that control. And I think as a gymnast, right? Like control is like one of the number one things you've got to have as a gymnast. You got to stay absolutely controlled if you're going to be precise to put out the best performance and ultimately stick the landing, so to speak. And I just always just kept firing off those decisions and staying away from the things that I felt would ultimately numb me from the pain that I was feeling.
Right. And subconsciously, you're talking about you had an awareness of your dad being alcoholic. Your aunt's trying to tell you it was the pain medication that killed your parents. You don't want to hear it. But you may have even thought that that's not the life I want for myself, even if you weren't thinking it,
Yeah. I think there has to be, some subconscious level of wanting to carry on in a way that was different than what I had seen happen to my parents.
Despite her grief, Lauren continued to excel even after college. She broke into the highly competitive field of sports broadcasting, eventually landing a job at ESPN. Today, she's well known for her Sideline Shimmy.
The Sideline Shimmy became my token phrase, I guess. You can relate to this as a broadcaster, right? When people say, oh, do you still get nervous? Well, there is a point in your life where I'm glad that I still get nervous. Yes, you flip on that red light and all of a sudden it's like 2 million people are staring back at you and waiting for you to say something and hope that you say it and it sounds and comes out right.
Yeah, it kind of becomes second nature after a while though, doesn't it? Like it's just what you do.
It is what you do, yeah. But I do love the adrenaline. It gives you a shot of adrenaline that it's fun to have. It feels like you're back out there competing again. At least for me, it really felt like I was back out there saluting the judges in the gymnastics arena and putting together a solid performance. But yes, the Sideline Shimmy kind of became my thing because of the nerves and trying to shake off those nerves and use that as a sort of a grounding exercise and giving me the opportunity to shake off the nerves. And ultimately, I threw it up on social media one day and the rest is history. Everyone seemed to love it.
And the athletes, they do it with you, right? So that makes it more fun.
Yeah. I love getting the athletes involved.
But as Lauren built a living telling other people's stories, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding the truth about her own family's struggles. It weighed heavily on her, knowing that publicly sharing what happened could possibly prevent others from going through the same kind of tragedy.
I think as a journalist, right, our job is to uncover the truth in other people's stories and other people's lives. We're supposed to dig. We're supposed to report the truth. And I think ultimately, as I'm starting to transcend into this sports career, I'd worked at my hometown station in Roanoke, Virginia. I'd gone to Parkersburg, West Virginia. I was starting my career there as a sports broadcaster, sports reporter, and anchor for a local TV station in Parkersburg. And I think when I'm starting to piece these stories together, starting to finally see, like, this is my job. I am a storyteller. I do this for a living. And ultimately, I am not taking ownership of my own story. Like, I am running from the truth, running as far as I can away from my own story. Like, reality check, there's a huge piece of integrity that comes along with being a journalist, and you got to take ownership of that. And as I started to mature in my career, I realized, like, hey, now we got to do something different here.
It's interesting you say that, because I felt a duty to tell Emily's story, because I had asked so many parents over the years to talk after losing a child, or people that had suffered all kinds of losses, and people who'd been hit by tornadoes or whatever it might be, and horrible crashes and things like that. And I just thought, how can I not tell her story? That doesn't seem fair if I ask all these other people to tell their stories, but yet I withhold my own. And every single person who told me their story over my decades working as a journalist said they did it so it could help someone else, so it could help others, or so it could prevent the same thing from happening to someone else, or something along those lines,
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's a huge testament to you to have the strength to do that, because I am now a new mother and have a young child, and just cannot even fathom the heartache of losing a child. And for you to be able to step up to the plate and have that, first of all, kudos to you for having the courage and strength to do that, and really to kind of set a precedent for others and giving them essentially permission to say, hey, like, here it is. But, there has to be still some level of pain that was associated with you taking those words and putting those out for the world to see and to hear. And correct me if I'm wrong, but almost kind of sitting back and maybe clinching a little bit and thinking, like, okay, what's the blowback going to be? What's the conversation going to be? What are people going to say about her? What is her lasting legacy going to be?
For sure. Because that wasn't the story that I wanted to write. Just like that wasn't the story that you wanted for your family either, or for yourself. Mm-hmm. None of us do. That's dissipated, I think, over time. Mm-hmm. And compartmentalizing, you talked about that. I think we all do that as journalists, compartmentalize, right? And able to do some of that as well. But so you have this curiosity then that, going into this field, you're telling people stories, and then you want to know the truth. Mm-hmm. And how did you find out the truth? Did you go to your aunt? Did you open up the autopsy papers, or what did you do?
It was a long, drawn out process, right? There wasn't just like one day I woke up and said, all right, I want to know the truth, right? But where things started to transcend, I'm in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And I remember my aunt actually sitting down, one of my colleagues that I was working with at the time had come over. We were going to cook dinner and hang out. And she came over and started talking to my aunt about what had happened. And I'm in the other room, I'm getting dinner ready. And it was the first time that I had not silenced my aunt from talking openly about it. This was 7 years after they died. Finally, just let her talk, let her share. Didn't share my own sentiments about it, but let her do. That was kind of, I think, sort of the next stepping stone towards this process of healing, of grieving, and really truly unlocking the shackles of shame. And the 10-year mark is when I opened those toxicology reports. I was working at the local CBS affiliate here in Birmingham, Alabama, where I currently live. And finally, I said, you know what? I need to see this for myself. Because for so many years, I said, if I don't see this on paper, I don't read it out loud, then it can't be true. Don't have to acknowledge it as truth and fact, because I'm not witnessing it on paper. So I knew that in opening that envelope, seeing those toxicology reports, I would have to acknowledge that this is the truth. This is factual. This is what happened. And I did that as we were doing a story on my family situation, how my parents passed away, and then ultimately pushing that story into the crisis that we're faced with, and that my parents are one of many that have gone through this crisis and that are being ravaged by it. Talk about freedom. I mean, I sometimes look back and say, man, dang it, why did it take me so long, right?
Well, it took you as long as it took you. You weren't ready. You weren't ready. And
Mhm.
apparently the time was right, and the crisis had, everybody was talking about it. I mean, it's gotten to the point where it's more and more a household thing, and the timing was right. And so
Mhm.
you did feel a sense of freedom. Did you feel angry at your parents? Did you feel anything else?
There was definitely a level of anger. Just, when you start to recognize the addiction, because, as I'm learning about what took their lives, I'm also learning about what addiction is. I'm learning the intricacies of it, which, as well know, it's not black and white. And gosh, there's just so much that is involved in the inner workings of how addiction literally grabs its claws into people. And, I think that that's where I couldn't quite comprehend it. And I just couldn't understand how it got to that point. And just as my parents being happy people and on the outside, seemingly everything was fine. I think the anger wasn't so much the addiction itself. It was the fact that they never spoke up and they never said anything to anybody. Why would you not talk? Why would you not? Well, we are a loving family. Like, somebody could have helped you. Somebody could have done something to make this better, to get you guys the help you needed. And, I sit here and reflect on it too and think, while it's not my job and while I'm young and immature in so many ways, I wish I would have asked more questions. And maybe that's something I would encourage people that are listening to this now to ask questions. And sometimes they're not easy questions, they're uncomfortable, but you got to get comfortable with getting uncomfortable sometimes. And I think that as my 14, 15-year-old self, I wish I would have asked more questions. And again, while it wasn't necessarily my role as their child, if I would have known then what I know now and what I'm trying to help these young adolescents when I go speak at a high school, to encourage them to ask these questions when they see something that's alarming or, potentially dangerous, or just curiosity, giving our family members, giving our friends, giving people around us an opportunity to have a voice and to ask those questions and really just to dig a little deeper and maybe understand, free of judgment. Hey, what's going on in your life right now? What's got you down? You seem a little off today. I've noticed these last few weeks things just seem a little off. And so it's trying to have these conversations in a loving way that is non-condemning. It's hard, it takes work. But, that's one piece of advice and encouragement I would have for anybody that's listening that might be on the other side of this thing, wondering if maybe their loved one is suffering with something that is creating, major turmoil in their lives.
And my guess is that your parents were deeply ashamed. I mean, they knew they shouldn't be doing this. Their life shouldn't be going this way. They knew it. Part of them knew it. And I didn't know that my daughter had graduated because I thought she was using Xanax and marijuana. I didn't know she had graduated to heroin. And of course, I didn't know because she was ashamed. And I later found an entry in her journal talking about shame
Mm.
related to drug use. So I'm sure your parents were ashamed. And especially back when this happened, people were not talking about this kind of thing. There was so much stigma surrounding, I say, diseases of the brain, whether it be mental health or addiction, that people didn't really feel comfortable about it. And most of this shame that I've talked to, many people who suffer from substance use disorder say nobody puts shame on them as much as they put on themselves. So that's most likely the case with your parents. And you tell this story and then you tell it publicly. Not only do you admit to yourself, this is what happened, after years of really denying the truth, is that you tell it publicly, which I really admire. And was that scary for you?
Oh, yeah. It was scary because you put that out there and you just wonder what the response is going to be, right? Because you spend so many years. I'm holding that legacy of my parents in my hands. And I felt like whatever comes out of my mouth, whatever I say, is ultimately going to be bound to them and their ultimate legacy and what they're remembered for. And my parents were remembered as such loving and supportive and kind, generous people. But if I let people in on the secret that they were addicts, then perhaps people would think very differently of them. And what I found, one of the stories that really resonates with me, is that I had done that news piece 10 years after their passing. And, with social media, love-hate relationship, right? You kind of wait and say, okay, what's the response going to be? And this goes out, and I shared it on social media. And a colleague of my father's reached out to me and indicated that she was so grateful that I'd finally come forward and shared their story, because for so many years she had so many questions and it was just eating her up to know what had happened. She wanted to know, and I think people have guesses, they have assumptions, but she just wanted to know. And she said, this brings me so much peace and so much closure. And then went on to talk about what a great man my father was, how funny he was, how loving he was, and how much he loved me and my brother and my family and everything that he did and how proud he was. And so nothing that woman, that his colleague had learned from that report that we had done, that story coming out and sharing the truth, didn't alter her view or viewpoint of my parents. Really, it gave her peace and closure and gave her permission to then tell me that she has family members that have experienced similar addictions. And she was so grateful that now maybe she could have the courage to have these conversations and be more open about it.
Because these two things can exist at the same time. Wonderful people, people with incredible talents and gifts to give to the world and kind and all of these things can also have substance use disorder. So, it's not a bad person who has substance use disorder. Often it is among the best people. I've talked to so many parents whose children were sensitive and kind and loving and all of these things and talented, and they suffer from this, and it's non-discriminatory.
Non-discriminatory. Does not matter the car you drive, the house you own, the job title you hold. We can all fall prey to this. And I think it's just important to keep that in mind and know that we need to empower ourselves through education, prevention. Be aware. You go to the doctor, they prescribe you something. Be aware of the side effects. Be aware that it can be addictive. Be aware that if you are in a lot of pain and you're going through maybe a surgery or something, that this is not for long-term use, and to make sure that you are empowered to do that and have an ally in this. And that's what I encourage people, have an ally. You have to go get a major surgery. Let that person know this is not something I want to do.
Talking about her journey has not only been a way for Lauren to help others, but has also been a huge part of her own healing process. Sharing her story has helped her work through grief and find a sense of peace.
I have this vision of those shackles just tied around my arms, and I have experienced such a high level of freedom. I just feel so free that I can speak openly about it without fear of judgment, and not just fear of judgment of how my parents will be judged, but how me personally, how I'm going to be judged. And I think that when you see the response and ultimately you see that other people have this example, you set this example, like, hey, it's okay. It's okay to test the waters. It's okay to share, whether it's the person sitting next to you, your next door neighbor, your colleague, the clerk at the grocery counter, whatever it may be. And I have experienced such a high level of freedom and this feeling, and I use this word because I feel like it's so powerful. I use this word, exonerated. I feel exonerated because for so many years I was a prisoner. And on the outside, I had it figured out. I was bubbly. I was energetic. I was that person that just, everyone just, you're the fighter. You're the overcomer. You've done all these amazing things. You're so strong, Lauren. And I felt like I had to just keep up that persona. And inside, it was just eating away at me. And I truly feel exonerated, number one, personally, because I've now stepped out in the truth. And number two, seeing the effects, the ripple effect that truth and being open, being vulnerable has created. And I encourage people, my mantra and my saying is fall in love with your story. Learn to fall in love with your story, because when you can do that, you can break those chains. And ultimately, my hope and goal is that I can break those chains and be an example for, my friends, the people around me, my colleagues, the people I stand on stage and talk to, and more than anything, my husband and my child.
In addition to speaking about her parents' struggles with substance use disorder, Lauren has also written a new book, Shatterproof, not only to tell her family's story, she also shares how shame silenced her. However, when she embraced her own story, she found strength and resilience, becoming shatterproof.
We just surpassed the 21-year anniversary of my parents passing. It took me 19 years to even put the first word on paper. And, when I reflect on sort of those events, like going back to school and like, how in the world do you survive that? How do you get your mind right to be able to just keep pushing forward? And I think having the support system, an incredible roommate, Kara, was just phenomenal. Having her, like going back to someone that cared, someone that loved me, someone, her family loved me like their own. I think just having that, the gymnastics team, the support system, did not want to go see a counselor, did not want to see a therapist, was like, nope, not for me. And then ultimately my coaches encouraged it and said, hey, like, you need this. They were sending in grief counselors for the team, as you can imagine. So, I needed to take advantage of that. And I did. And there were times where I leaned in, times I leaned out. And, I think that is one of the saving graces for me, is just having some level of structure around me that kept me grounded. And because I went back to Rutgers, I think had I have not been forced to go back to Rutgers and my aunt would have said, hey, you can just stay here and live here for a little while, I think I would have probably just sat on that bed all day and just, I had commitments. So like I had to set an alarm clock. I had to get up out of the bed. Like there was no choice. And don't get me wrong, like there were days I'd go in the gym and I'd just go sit in the corner and cry and they wouldn't say anything to me because they said, well, her mom and dad died, so we're not going to push her too hard. But there came a point where they finally said, all right, Lauren, enough's enough. Like you've got to get control of this or you're going to drown in this. And ultimately the price you pay is you get kicked out of school and then who knows what's next.
Although Lauren has learned to live with her grief over the past couple of decades, she admits there are still moments when it feels overwhelming. That is especially the case during big milestones, such as her wedding day or her son's birthday.
And the day that he was born, and knowing that he'll never know his grandparents other than what I share with him. And when he one day is old enough to read my book, and it does feel like a lot of missed milestones. I am thankful for the memories that exist. I'm thankful for the 18 years that I had them. My in-laws, my husband's parents are amazing. So many great family members and friends that have certainly stepped in, and nobody can ever replace my parents, but I am so grateful for the people that have stepped in. I would just say that, there are times where I see the interaction with Mason and his grandparents, my in-laws, and I think, man, what would this look like if my parents were sitting here right now? And there's a lot of what ifs, and it's hard to dismiss those. And there's just sometimes, I just go to bed at night and just can't stop thinking about them. It's hard.
Right. Because it'll always be with you. It'll always be with you, that grief, the loss. Nobody can ever replace your parents, but I think you have a wonderful attitude about it, the best that you could have. To be grateful for the time you had with them and to be grateful for the people who are in your life now, making your life really rich, which it sounds like it is. And I'm just really glad that you did decide to share their story about a decade ago and that you continue to do so. It's so important.
Well, I appreciate that, Angela. It means a lot to me. And just thank you for the voice that you are and to have the courage and strength to share Emily's story. It's not all in vain. And I know that her legacy lives on.
Yeah, that's what I worry about, that it's all in vain. And of course, the legacy that you're creating here will live on through your book as well.
Yeah, it's always one of those things, I go speak at events and I get 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour if I'm lucky. And then there's a million questions and you can't answer them all. And the book really outlines things. And I will say so many things were discovered in that process. You talk about not remembering how you got to your daughter's apartment. There were so many of those black holes that when I sat down and started writing this book, I said, I got to figure this out. I got to piece this together. It was really just an amazing process and a healing process. If anything comes from this, it's number one, I just hope for tremendous impact for other people. And number two, I can tell you that the healing that I've experienced in this process has just been exponential. So grateful for it and grateful for the people that have been alongside me in this journey. And I'm just so excited for people to get their hands on it and hopefully get to experience, some level of healing and understanding, because the goal is to meet people where they're at. And whether it is addiction, shame is something we all experience, right? And so I want people to understand that, they don't have to be defined by those circumstances and that they can use shame, they can use challenges as a catalyst for growth, and that it doesn't have to be a setback. It's not the end of our story. When we have a setback, it's not the end of our story. Truly, it's just a turning point in the road and gives us an opportunity to go in a different direction.
Well, you are a living example of that. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. It's been a pleasure to get to know you. I am sorry for the loss of your parents, but I am grateful that you're talking about it.
You as well, Angela. Thank you so much for your love and your heart. And I'm so excited to just continue on this journey and join hands with you on this fight to help people navigate this unfortunate set of circumstances that we're faced with this epidemic.
Thank you. And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. If you found it helpful, please consider leaving a positive review and sharing it with your friends and family. We'd also love to hear your ideas for future episodes, so don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Michael Guerin. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.